All right, how about this for a headline? Donald Trump, the president for now, is now in a Twitter war with the top aide's husband after George Conway, who is the husband of Kellyanne Conway, insisted Trump's weekend Twitter tirade was evidence of declining mental health. He got into a vicious back and forth with Trump's 2020 campaign manager. That's when Trump, who was advised to stay out of it, entered the fray, calling Conway a total loser. So a few hours ago, Conway went on the record with the Washington Post telling his side of the story, insisting, quote, he has had a number of notable interactions with Trump over the past decade. Trump had claimed in this tweet that he hardly knew him, often concerning legal representation and sensitive legal matters. Since Trump became president, Conway described the president as mendacious and incompetent and predicted he would not win re-election. This is too weird for me, Ron Klain.
Well, it's extremely weird, I'll give you that, but it's not unprecedented.
Yeah, there's a historical parallel.
I'll
talk about
parallel, right? For fans of Watergate history, or fans of the podcast Slow Burn, you know that a similar dynamic played out in Watergate when the president's campaign manager, John Mitchell, also the attorney general, and his wife, Martha Mitchell, wound up kind of in the same place, with Martha Mitchell being a principal leaker against President Nixon, putting evidence out there about him. And Nixon tried to have her offed, basically, and locked up in jail and so on and so forth. Now, you know, I think the challenge here is...
Wait, you can't... So I didn't know this story until I listened to the Slow Burn podcast, and we will devote some more time to this. We'll play some of it. You reminded me of this, and I wish I'd pulled it. But this is so important because we make these Nixon parallels loosely, but this is a Nixon parallel in the specific. I mean, she was physically threatened by Secret Service. She was locked in a hotel. I mean, hopefully with Twitter and everything, George Conway will call for help. But this is someone with a window into Trump through his wife's experiences, who was literally using Twitter to sound a four-alarm fire day after day.
That's right. I mean, it is important to know that George Conway is, first of all, one of the nation's most respected conservative lawyers, a very serious and substantial person in the conservative legal community, not a liberal. This isn't like James Carville and Mary Matlin, two different political parties. George Conway's a very conservative legal figure who has been consulted by Donald Trump on legal matters.
Right.
And so when he says this, it's not just him repeating, you know, household talk that he has had with his wife, Kellyanne. It's his personal interaction with the president by a conservative lawyer.
That's right.
That's very, very serious testimony, if you will, about Donald Trump and kind of what he's doing as president.
Phil Rucker, he came to your newspaper. Take us inside this interview today.
Yeah, well, you know, President Trump sort of invited it himself by being so undisciplined to send that tweet this morning. And of course, the tweet was factually inaccurate, as many of the president's tweets are. And so George Conway simply went on the record with my colleague Josh Dawsey at the Washington Post to correct the president's inaccuracies, starting with, yes, Trump does know George Conway, has known him for more than a decade. He actually helped with a condo board dispute back in 2006, and Trump wrote a fawning letter to George Conway thanking him for that. They had many interactions during the campaign and in the beginning of the administration, including a ride during the transition period where Trump asked George Conway whether he ought to fire Preet Bharara, who was then the U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. Fast forward to Washington, George Conway was slated to take a top job in the Justice Department and actually backed out of that job. The president's allegation made by his campaign manager was that George Conway didn't get the job, wasn't offered the job, and is therefore bitter. But in fact, George Conway backed out of that job, he told Josh Dawsey, because he was uncomfortable with the fighting between the White House and the Justice Department. So it just goes on and on and on, and it's George Conway really trying to protect his own record and reputation against the lies of the president.
Frank Figliuzzi, it is a rare example of a Republican calling out a Republican president for this war on justice.
It is, and I'm thankful to see it. And I think the Conways and Trump are grateful, better be, that there's something called a spousal privilege that can be invoked by either spouse as to what they've said to each other and whether they can testify against each other, because that would be fascinating. So we've got somebody, not just a Republican, not just a conservative, but somebody who has been on that inside, knows Trump, knows him personally, and then continues to have kind of a perception that's developed every day through the work of his wife. But I'm telling you, as a law enforcement career guy. What I'm focused in on is the constant drumbeat of the mental health issues here. And if this were somebody else, what I would be thinking about would be what behavioralists talk about as the pathway to violence. There's a flashpoint that has warning signs and indicators before it occurs, and it involves obsessive behavior and brooding on one issue, the inability to step back and see reality for what it is, the finding of an enemy and constantly finding enemies and targeting them, even in the case of John McCain, after death. And then the language of desperation is something we key in on if someone's headed toward a flashpoint. And so that phrase, witch hunt, is a form of desperation. I can't do anything about this. Where is this going? I'm concerned about where it's going, because on a workplace violence level, it would be headed toward violence. If you're president of the United States, that flashpoint could look like something that is completely unexpected on the world scene or on the national scene. And that's what should be troubling us about what Conway is warning us about.
The job Conway would have had at the Justice Department was heading the civil division, which handles all the lawsuits against the administration. He would have been one of the top defenders of Trump. The travel ban, the ban on transgender people serving in the military, everything that Trump gets sued for would have been George Conway's problem. And it is an interesting irony of history that he went from potentially being one of Trump's top defenders to being one of his top antagonists. In addition, Conway's criticism of the president very much speaks for a huge swath of the white-collar legal community, particularly in D.C. Trump has had a terrible time getting good lawyers.
Super important point. Just give me one more beat on that, because that is absolutely correct.
Good lawyers don't want to work for Trump. He doesn't pay them, and he doesn't take their advice. It's been a problem throughout his entire career. He has always struggled to get competent counsel. And a good piece of evidence of that is the fact that his current lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, basically can't go on TV anymore because the last time he went on, he made things worse for the president, not better. The reality is, people who practice the law, who are nerdy about it, who dedicate their lives to it, who care deeply about these law and order and rule of law issues, look at President Trump and feel he's radioactive.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.